All right, so if you've been watching this series intently, you know that the last video, I was wearing the same shirt. And the reason is because we were so far away from the shop, we decided to film another episode because we were just driving around in the hills and didn't really realize how far away we were. So we're gonna film another episode and give it to you later. So let's talk about a very simple thing that is actually extremely complicated when you get into it, or can be, and that is the integration of the TCU, shifting, and torque translation with the MoTeC 991 plug-and-play package. So, shifting integration in the 991, it gives you a few different options on what you want to do. You have options of whether you want to reduce torque on shifts, which in certain scenarios is highly recommended, or whether you want to cut timing on shift, which in other situations is also highly recommended, or a combination of the two. And then you can adjust that based 100% on load, or produced Newton meters of torque, I should say, and gear, in any variation of that you want. So let me explain that. Let's say that in normal mode, in my zero mode here on the dash, that's my kind of low comfort, low boost setting, that I want the car to just shift real nice and lazy. I want it to come up, I want it to shift and just kind of like, almost like just a smooth out of the power, back into the power, out of the power, back into the power. No problem. What I do is I take any shift cut out of it, I put in a torque reduction, which I can do based on how far your foot is in the throttle or how many Newton meters of torque the car is producing versus the gear that it's in. So I can give you a nice smooth reduction of torque in this mode at certain Newton meters of torque, and then as you roll into the throttle, I can take those torque reductions out a little bit and start feeding in any other type of reduction that I'd like, whether that be shift cuts or that torque reduction. However, it does it in several different ways. There's no reason to go into that. And that sounds pretty simple. It can get complicated because you have control over it per mode, and there are times that the car wants to do, it's the smoothest and most fun if it does it in certain ways. You can also adjust your shift cuts. Of course, I mean, again, if you're a tuner, this is probably pretty, base level rudimentary information. You probably already know this, but if you're an individual, it's kind of fun to know. So I can make it so this thing takes, a 1/10 of a second to cut, or 2/10 of a second to cut, or cuts for 2/10 of a second, I should say, or longer. And then I can tell the ECU how fast I want that to decay. This is measured in milliseconds. How quickly do I want that cut to actually just decay? So do I want to pull 30 degrees of timing on shift at full load for 1/10 of a second and have a 200 millisecond delay? Or do I want to do it for less time than that, or more time than that? And again, lots of details will go into that. The timing of that and how the car comes back in will be based on the clutch and so on and so forth. But it gives you the ability to do things like a longer, more aggressive cut will keep the clutch intact longer. Why? Because you've cut the power out of it, you've let the car shift the gear, and then you've brought the power back into it. And instead of that happening very quickly and before the clutch is fully clamped, you bringing power back in, it happens to where it cuts out, shifts the gear, the clutch clamps right back up all the way, and then you bring the power back, which is extremely useful in some scenarios. Some scenarios you don't need to do that, and you can make the car faster by reducing that. So the way I personally like to do it is I like a small torque reduction on shift where it doesn't pop or bang or do anything like that when I'm just cruising around. I just want the thing to just just cruise. And I can do that very simply. But then when I'm on it, I want the thing to have a pretty aggressive, decently firm kind of pop shift or bang that gets you into the next gear. which I personally really like. And then of course when you're wide open, you tune that delay to the crossover on the clutch, and you know, how much power you want to throw back into the next gear, how quickly. So that's all a variable. So yeah, so that's an exciting thing to be able to tune as a tuner, and to be able to make it so that you dial that in for that customer. Maybe you know the customer just loves super aggressive, you know, a super aggressive feel, and you can dial that in for that customer that way. Maybe you think that the customer wants a more leisurely feel. He puts his wife in the car, so on and so forth, and he just wants the car to kind of cruise in certain modes. You can dial that in that way as well. So that's shifting. And that's all under, you know, under shift situation, you know, the shift tab, if you will, in the MoTeC, which we won't go into because there's no need. The other side of things is torque and the translation of torque to the TCM. And again, forgive me if I'm going too into detail. Maybe none of you care. Maybe some of you have thought to themselves, why in the world has he done a poll? I'm not listening to anything cool. I'm not seeing anything launch. Nothing's going crazy right now. Well, I'm sorry. This is an informative series, okay? So, yeah. So torque translation. Torque translation is basically what the TCM sees that the engine is producing in order to tell it how to clamp the clutch, when to clamp the clutch, how much clutch pressure to put at the clutches at any given time. So that comes into play in rollout, when you're just sitting still and you roll into the throttle, you to make it more slippy or more grabby. Then there's also your partial throttle shifting. So based on how many Newton meters of torque, the model in the MoTeC tells the TCU that the engine is making at any given time, is how firm the shift will be, how stiff the shift will be, how quick the shift will be. And that's completely fully adjustable. So if you're a guy that really likes your shift to feel like you've got a 67 Camaro with a shift kit in it, I can make it feel like that for you. If you are the gentleman or lady that wants a very nice plush feel until you get on it, and then you want it to kind of hit you in the butt, I can make it feel like that for you as well. And that's all based on the torque translation that the TCM sees that the ECU is putting out. The model for the torque translation is complicated. I'm not going to get into all of it, and I don't even understand all of it. I probably don't understand half of it. But it's a generated number that the model in the MoTeC spits out that says, hey, listen, this is the amount of torque I'm making right now in this particular scenario, based on airflow, based on timing, based on fueling. This is what I'm making. And then we give you guys, the tuners, the ability to manipulate that number with a Porsche torque translation multiplier and a couple of different tables that you can use to dial that in, so that you can tell the car what you want it to do, where and when. And it works incredibly. There are units, standalone units out there for these cars and other cars that model does not work well. It's a function, but the way that it talks to the TCU and the feedback that it gets, I'm just gonna say it's not complete. It's not good. And I'm not calling out any names. There's several of them. The MoTeC does it phenomenally. They did an awesome job with the firmware in this. It really listens to the TCM well, and the MoTeC does that function incredibly. It really does, and consistently. You know, that's another thing that you get a lot of times. You'll have a different clutch clamping when the car is cold than you get when the car is warm, because the fluids are different, or the fluid is a different temperature. And that's a very normal thing in some ECUs, whether it be stock or whether it be some of the other aftermarket ECUs. You know, thankfully in the MoTeC we identified that early, and we give you the ability to adjust all those clutch pressures based on the temperatures that the vehicle is seeing, which has been very powerful in making consistent rollout feel, consistent shift feel. It's a very big help. So that kind of gives you a little insight into the torque translation to the TCM, the model in the MoTeC and how that kind of works, and then you know, some of the control we have over the shifting feel, the shifting sound, and the dynamic of how that works with the clutch. Some of it might be interesting, some of it might not be, some of it might not be technical enough, some of it might be too technical, but I give you some info to go out there and digest, and maybe you find it interesting. So that's the end of that one. In the next episode, I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but definitely put in the comments if it's something interesting that you want to understand, you want to know more about. If I don't know, I'll either do research or I'll pull somebody in that does know. So thanks again for watching. Please subscribe. We would love more people following our channel. We're going to try very hard to put out some quality content for you guys, and maybe something a little bit more exciting than me driving around in a car talking to you about something you probably don't really care about. But we'll do our best. Thanks so much. Appreciate you all, as always. Until next time.